Good morning. It's Tuesday, June 30th, and continuing along with our study of the readings for the upcoming Sunday, which is July 5th, the fifth Sunday after Pentecost. Today I'd like to share with you Psalm number 145, verses 8 through 14. So if you want to pause your video right now and look that up, you can. If not, I will read it for you. The Lord is gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. Lord, you are good to all, and your compassion is over all your works. All your works shall praise you, O Lord, and your faithful ones shall bless you. They shall tell of the glory of your kingdom and speak of your power, that all people may know of your power and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. Your dominion endures throughout all ages. You, Lord, are faithful in all your works and loving in all your works. The Lord holds all those who fall and lifts up those who are bound down. The entire 145th Psalm is an acrostic poem, which means that the verses, starting at verse 1, each begin with a word correlating to the Hebrew alphabet. Now, we are only using a section of the psalm, and the translation from Hebrew into English will throw off the rhythm and the flow of the poem in its native Hebrew. So if the flow of this psalm kind of feels disjointed to you, that may be because you're used to reciting it in the original Hebrew. So for today, the first two lines, 8 and 9, and the last two lines, 13b and 14, testify to important features about God's character and how God deals with human beings. The middle four lines, verses 10 through 13a, are addressed directly to God and focus on the glory and eternal nature of God's kingdom. So this fluctuation between testimony about God and direct address to God is common in the Psalms, and indeed it is characteristic of authentic worship in general, which must always balance out prayer and testimony, praise and proclamation, confession and profession. Verse 8 is a paraphrase of God's self-revelation to Moses at Mount Sinai. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. That's from Exodus 34, verse 6. So this initial divine self this initial divine self-revelation was an important source of reflection for later Old Testament writers who quote and paraphrase it quite often, including in the Psalms. For people of Israel, God's gracious and merciful nature, God's slowness to anger, the abundance of steadfast love, these are all foundational in forming people's relationship to God. So what is especially noteworthy about Psalm 145 is how the gracious character of God, which is initially revealed as part of God's relationship to Israel, is then extended to all of creation, not just all people, but all of creation. Verse 8 reflects Israel's traditional core of understanding of God's disposition toward Israel itself. And verse 9 immediately broadens that so that the recipients of his disposition, his steadfast love, is included for everyone and all creation. The Lord is good to all, and his compassion is over all that he has made. And the word all, which appears over and over again in verses 9 through 14, is this strong indication of a comprehensive scope of God's gracious dealings with the entire creation. Just as verse 9 asserted that God is good and is good to all, so verse 10 says, all of your works shall give thanks to you. All of creation give thanks to God. So the reference to God works picks up on that language again at the end of verse 9. God's compassion is given to all that he has made, just as God's own creation is the recipient of God's compassion. So it is that all of creation returns thanks to God. You may remember one of Jesus' comments that if his disciples are silent, even the rocks will sing out praise to God. So how is it possible that all of God's works will return thanks to the Creator? The second half of verse 10 and verses 11 and 12 explain, your faithful shall bless you. The faithful will bless God by testifying to all people. The faithful will testify of God's glory, power, and mighty deeds. So these verses present a certain challenge to God's people. It is God's people's responsibility to proclaim God's kingdom and mighty works to all people, so that all of God's creation may then give thanks to God in return. You may remember from last week's sermon that our emphasis from Jesus is to go and make disciples of all nations. Here again we see this in the psalm today, that it's all of God's people's responsibility to proclaim God's kingdom and mighty works to everyone. The notion of God's kingdom is central in verses 11 through 13a. This eternal nature contrasts with the temporary nature of all human kingdoms, of all other human institutions. Whatever humans do has a temporary nature. The glory and splendor of God's kingdom brings to nothing any and all claims of glory that might be asserted by human governments or other human institutions. Jesus spoke of God's kingdom as the treasure and the pearl of highest value, worth selling all that one has just to obtain God's kingdom. Verse 14 concludes our reading with a turn of an emphasis. God's care for the fallen and the beaten down. Though it's not a major point so far in this psalm, this picks up on the language of mercy and compassion from verses 8 and 9 at the beginning. Again, there is an emphasis here of the universal outreach of God, not just for a select few. Two more uses of the word all are here in these verses. But just importantly, the verse reminds us that God's glory and God's might does not merely contrast with human weakness. Rather, in God's kingdom, the weak and the suffering are raised up, and they are upheld by God's glory and might. I hope you're doing well this week. I know we're all staying safer at home, and I hope to see you as soon as you hope to see me. But this way, at least, we can stay in contact with each other as we prepare for worship on Sunday, the 5th Sunday after Pentecost, July 5th, 2020. Take care. God bless.